In Plato's book, The Republic, we can observe Socrates' hypothetical thinking on politics, particularly in his philosophy and his being. Why do I specify hypothetical? It's important to note that Socrates never wrote anything. Everything we know or perceive as Socratic thought is in reality a narrative interpretation through the Platonic perspective. This book addresses topics that seek to answer an essential question. What is the ideal government? Here, the concept of politics itself is established, which will lead to different types of models of governance. Book 1 begins with a dialogue between Socrates and Thrasymachus on justice. The Socratic view of justice holds that just laws and knowledge lead man to the pursuit of truth, which in turn leads him to the fullness of justice. However, Thrasymachus argues that only laws imposed by the state are valid, and that the strongest will always prevails in them. This is the first clash of ideas in the dialogue, as Thrasymachus does not consider the possibility of unjust laws, reducing everything to subordination to the ruler in the polis. However, Socrates argues that not all state laws must be followed if they are unjust. Thrasymachus' thinking reflects a tyrannical view, which is understandable given the historical context of ancient Greece. We must go back to 561 BC, when the Athenian democracy failed as a model of governance. A group of oligarchs accumulated wealth and increased inequality in the city-states after Solon's exile from Athens. This resulted in poverty and corruption in the government, which led to the emergence of a tyrant in response to the discontent of the impoverished people. Added to this was the failure of the second attempt to establish a democratic system during the Peloponnesian War, which ended up dividing Athens between its social groups, leading to its defeat and the rise of Spartan and Macedonian military hegemony. Plato was a strong critic of the concentration of wealth, as he believed that it only corrupted human virtue, something he experienced when he saw the ineffectiveness of oligarchies. This thinking laid the foundation for social groups and equality, a concept that George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel would use to explain how all ideas have an essence of being and come from ancient Greece, provided they are considered Western values. These social groups would be classified into three: rulers, guardians, and artisans. Each of these groups has specific virtues, which will be their access to the world of forms, a dimension where things exist perfectly and without flaws. For rulers, virtue is wisdom, which allows them to rule as philosopher king. A wise ruler is sufficiently enlightened to make rational decisions, always seeking the best for the state and not for individual interests. Then there are guardians, whose virtue comes from the strength necessary to defend the polis from invasion or internal degeneration. Finally, artisans possess the virtue of temperance, which allows them to suspend selfish desires and fulfill their social duties. This is the virtuous skill of the artisan. Among the myths presented in the work, the myth of the cave is essential to understanding man's virtuous capacity. The men who are watching the shadows projected on the wall of the cave are those who do not have the capacity to think like a philosopher, to believe that what they see is material reality is to fall into an illusion. This gesture of nonconformity is something that a philosopher king would reject. The philosopher's duty is to leave the cave and teach others how to access the truth represented by the world of forms. But Socrates says, "I only know what I know, nothing." He is referring to the intellectual combustion of wanting to know beyond what is already established. Doubt is the engine of knowledge. Plato was a man far ahead of his time, which also led to failed attempts to establish a philosopher king in the polis of Syracuse when Dionysius the Younger came to power. He was not a virtuous being and ended up becoming a tyrant, even though Plato educated him to reach the highest level of virtue. Karl Marx claimed that the driving force of history has been class struggle, and he was not wrong. Since ancient Greece, there has been a desire to abolish wealth, grant political power to women, and end educational inequality. It can be seen that the social problems of modernity still echo the past, and some things simply have not changed.